Everyone needs money, and when you are a young girl and you want to show off in front of your peers a new blouse or a good perfume, the desire to earn money becomes especially acute. I live in a well-to-do family and my life is quite normal. My parents provide everything I need. And you probably ask, and why then I complain that I do not have enough money? But here everything is simple. My father is a very strict man. Even at the age of 13 he told me that he would provide me with everything I needed for a normal life, which meant food, clothes, and in this way, what is pocket money I heard only from my peers. If I want more, I have to work to earn it myself, my father said. So it turned out, I got used to work since I was 14 years old, mostly all sorts of small part-time jobs like handing out leaflets. I graduated from school with a distinction and went to university, to the Faculty of Economics. I have always been strong in the exact sciences, and economics is not badly applicable in practice, so I chose this direction for reasons of pure pragmatism. One day, mundanely flipping through the site with vacancies and choosing one that I could combine with my studies, I came across one interesting proposal. In the house, which was located close to mine, required a caregiver for an elderly woman. From the address of the house, I immediately realized that it was in a wealthy neighborhood, which meant that the potential employer was a wealthy person. The job description said that a person was needed who would be able to look after an elderly woman from 8 to 11 in the evening. Duties include, to drink and feed the woman one time during this period, and to give her medication. The note stated that the old lady has paralyzed legs and is also blind. It was noted in bold print that there would be no need to change diapers or wash her, as these things are done by separate people. All that is required is to be around at the specified time and make sure that the woman is okay and, if anything happens, to call an ambulance and inform the family doctor. Promised very decent money, and most importantly, my study schedule did not contradict this work. A bonus, and my house was not far away, about 5 minutes on foot can be reached. In short, just the perfect job. Consider the money for almost nothing. The only thing that confused me was that I had never worked as a caregiver before. But I quickly pushed these thoughts away, telling myself that everything happens for the first time. After that, I called the number given in the vacancy and made an appointment with the employer. After my studies, I went straight to the potential employer's office. After riding in a spacious elevator to the 3rd floor of a 5-story building with a very wide layout, I pressed the doorbell of apartment 7, which was only one of 2 on this floor, which was explained by a very large area of apartments in this building. A tall gray-haired man, looking about 50 to 55 years old, opened the door. He looked at me with a calm, intelligent look and introduced himself. My employer's name was Lawrence. In turn, I replied, "Nice to meet you, Mia." The man smiled good-naturedly and gestured me inside. Taking off my shoes at the entrance and putting on my guest slippers, I entered a very spacious room, which apparently was the living room. It was even bigger than in my father's apartment. The man walked ahead of me and led me to the room of the woman I was to look after. As we passed through the hall, we stood in front of a large wooden door with a stained glass window, and Lawrence carefully opened it.
"Lawrence, is that you?"
"Yes, Mom, but I'm not alone. I found someone to watch you while I'm in the office."
The old lady was lying on a massive wooden bed in the corner of the huge room. There was a small table beside her, apparently for placing food and medicine, and there was a large window near the bed, ajar for ventilation. Suddenly the old woman spoke up.
And what is your name?
She was obviously addressing me, Mia, I calmly replied, but then the old woman spoke up.
That's a beautiful name, and can I look at you?
I froze in place in surprise. How is she going to look at me if he is blind? Lawrence leaned over to me and said quietly,
Could you show her your face?
I looked at him questioningly, and then he said more quietly,
Blind people can study facial features by touch.
I was a little scared to admit it, but I walked over to the bed and gently bent over the elderly woman, who smelled strongly of medicine. Her dry and wrinkled hands gently touched my face, and then she ran the surface of her palms from the top to the bottom of my forehead to my chin. Then she smiled broadly with her completely toothless mouth, and said,
Beautiful. Just like me when I was young.
And with the same smile she dropped her hands back on the bed. The first day I looked after Ella under the watchful eye of her son, who wanted to make sure I was up to my role. He would periodically look in our room and ask if everything was okay. He also showed me how to feed the woman the vegetable purees that were intended for her and explained in detail what pills to give her and when to give them. At the end of the first day, he nodded satisfactorily and said that I had done well, and if I was ready, I could start, and I agreed. Then Lawrence solemnly handed me the duplicate keys to his apartment and said that, as the job description stated, I should come at 8 and leave at 11. But at the end, he added that even if he stayed longer than 11, I should still leave. I didn't question him about it, suggesting that my grandmother might have a family doctor come to visit, which they just had. Considering what kind of security system the house had, with a bunch of video surveillance cameras and a private security company that moved in at the slightest hint of wrongdoing, it was no wonder he gave me the keys so calmly. And so began my work as a nurse. Surprisingly, I even began to like it. Ella, despite the terrible ailments that affected the body, had a surprisingly lively and active mind. She told a lot of stories from her past and willingly listened to mine, and told very interesting stories. It was a pleasure to listen to her. A week passed. It was Friday again. I sat next to Ella as usual, and after I made sure she had taken her medication, which she had after her meal, I went to the kitchen to put the dishes in the dishwasher. I sat down at the kitchen table and leaned my head on my hands and sighed heavily, because it was the end of the session and I was critically sleep deprived, because to pass the exams for a decent grade in our university was a quest of legendary level, and the preparation for it had to be appropriate. I didn't notice how I dozed off, and I was awakened by a phone call from Lawrence, and when I picked up the phone I noticed that the time was already 15 minutes past 1. Pressing the green handset icon on the screen, I brought the smartphone to my ear and sleepily spoke. Good evening, what's up?
Are you still at my house?
Yes, I apologize. I was so tired I dozed off and didn't notice the time had passed. I'll go to Ella's right now and make sure she's okay.
Don't you dare. Stay where you are and don't make a sound. Got it, I'll be right there.
The man's voice was scared and tense. I realized he wasn't kidding. There was a special system in the door that records when it opens and closes and reports to the owner's smartphone, one of the security measures in this building, which is how Lawrence knew I was still in the apartment. But the reason for his anxiety was not clear to me. There was no one else in the house except me and the blind paralyzed woman. Was there? Remembering Igor's words that I should not make noise, I carefully, almost tiptoeing out of the kitchen, trying not to make a sound, even breathing slowly and quietly. By the way, the kitchen is on the second floor. The apartment was so huge that it was divided into 2 floors. It could give a head start to a country mansion. When I left the kitchen, I looked at the end of the long, empty hallway that led to the stairs to the first floor, straight into the hall next to where my grandmother's room was. The floors weren't creaky, so I walked completely silently, and when I reached the end of the corridor I looked down at the railing of the staircase that led to the hall. I could see most of it. At that moment I thought I was still dreaming, but after rubbing my eyes a couple of times I realized that it wasn't a dream. Ella was standing in the hall near the wall, looking out the huge window, where a large, full moon was visible, brightly illuminating the hall. The lights were off in the apartment, but I could see perfectly well, thanks to the large number of windows and the bright full moon. She was paralyzed from the waist down, and now she was standing in the other room on her own 2 feet, as if nothing had happened. I didn't think Lawrence would play such a cruel trick on me, but there was something wrong. The first thing I tried to do was to call out to her, but luckily I stopped myself, remembering the warning against making noise. We stood like that for about 2 minutes, but suddenly my phone rang in my pocket, a messenger message alert, and I pulled it out with a lightning-fast swipe of my fingers and set it to silent. Even though my grandmother was standing with her back to me, I could tell that her mouth was stretched in a wide smile.
Mia, where are you? Come to me. I want to look at you,
said the old woman in her soft, ingratiating voice, but in it, something changed, subtly, but something was wrong. I slowly began to step back, but so as not to make a sound and at the same time trying not to lose sight of her. Suddenly Ella turned around abruptly, her whitish, unseeing eyes staring into the void. She took a step. At the same time, her legs did not bend at the knees, so her gait looked as unnatural as possible. She took step by step towards the center of the hall. Having waddled to it, she began to say again,
Mia, you rascal, don't make an old man play hide and seek with you.
This time her voice sounded not so soft and ingratiating, there was irritation in it. Slowly, I tried to walk back down the hall toward the kitchen, and at that moment my phone fell out of my pocket. It had happened before, because the pockets were not deep and the phone was oversized and the cover did not contribute to the additional grip on the fabric. The gadget fell to the floor, and I froze in horror at the realization of what had happened. For a second there was silence, then I heard the quick and resounding slap of bare feet on the parquet, rushing up the stairs. Ella, or rather, what she was at the moment, appeared in the second-floor hallway, swiftly and clumsily on unsteady legs. She silently turned her head, as if listening to the silence, and I, in turn, held my breath to minimize the sounds of my presence, and I could have stopped my heart, so that its pounding would not give me away. We were separated by about 5 meters. Behind me was the kitchen, which was a dead end, and behind Ella was the exit to the staircase that led to the hall, where there was a saving front door. Slowly I continued to pivot back towards the kitchen, and at that moment she suddenly spoke again.
Mean girl, stop bullying the old woman, but quickly come here.
From her former softness and ingratiating voice there was no trace. She shouted, as shouted angry at the behavior of negligent grandchildren of old people. Trying hard to hold back my sobs, I continued to stagger backward, not noticing that I was in the kitchen and accidentally hit the mug on the kitchen table where I had poured my coffee a couple hours ago. The ceramic piece slid silently off the edge of the table and clanked loudly, shattering into hundreds of shards as it hit the floor. The creature, which not so long ago had been a sweet old woman, turned its head toward me with a sharp, predator-like movement. Her face twisted again in a terrible toothless grin, and then she hobbled toward me on her unbendable legs. Realizing that I could not let myself be caught, I jumped up on the table, and when it came close enough and spread its arms to try to grab me, I leapt forward, toward the corridor and the stairs, literally flying over Ella, and then ran as fast as I could. Jumping over the steps, I found myself on the first floor, while hearing behind me the quick and clumsy slapping of bare feet. It was almost behind me, and my brain was working in slow-mo, processing information at the limit of its capacity. I sprinted toward the front door and reflexively swerved to the right, because the keys were in my bag, and it was on the couch in the hall, so I wouldn't have had time to get them out and open the door. I ran down another corridor, at the end of which was a pantry. I flew into it and slammed the door shut with a turn of the lock knob. It was a blessing that the door to the pantry was the same as most of the other rooms, and it was impossible to open it from the outside if it was locked from the inside. Immediately there was a heavy thump, which made the solid wooden door shudder and the knob jerk up and down rapidly. I slid quietly against the wall, slid down the tool rack, covered my head with my hands, and finally cried. The banging on the door continued, as did the threats to open it immediately or I'd be worse off. Suddenly there was a sharp slam of the front door and the noise of several male voices. They quickly gave commands to each other.
Be careful, don't let her grab you. Aim for the thigh. The tranquilizer will work quickly, but not instantly, so keep your distance.
The noise and fuss continued for another 5 minutes, but I couldn't hear them very well because my crying was drowning them out. Suddenly there was a quiet and measured knock on the door and Lawrence's quiet voice was heard. "Mia, come out, it's over." I waddled to the front door on woozy legs, and after a few seconds of hesitation, I opened the door. There was a light on in the hallway and Lawrence was standing in front of the door. He looked at me with a concerned and guilty look and then sighed and said quietly,
"Come on, I'll explain everything to you."
We walked to the kitchen where I was able to wash my face while Lawrence made herbal tea. He poured it into 2 mugs and then quietly began his story.
My mother lost her sight 10 years ago due to retinal problems. Alas, there is no cure for such things, and soon, she also managed to take a bad fall and injure her lumbar spine, leaving her paralyzed in the lower extremities. Visits to the best clinics in Switzerland and Israel did not give any results. Everywhere doctors in one voice said that the rest of her life she will spend bedridden and in the darkness of blindness. I was beginning to despair, until a business partner advised me to turn to one village witch doctor. He assured me that the witch doctor saved his life when he was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, said no treatment did not help, the disease stubbornly progressed and doctors gave him 6 months, and here someone also advised him her. He says she took not a little money and something reed in his ear, but so quickly that he did not really understand what she said, and then sent to the bath, and when next time he took tests, the doctors almost dropped their jaws, because even a hint of tumor was no longer there. Realizing that there was nothing to lose, I came to the address. As the acquaintance said, she really took not small money, and then she whispered something in my mother's ear, and as she was in a trance, then she said that if she did not have her own strength to walk, then we need someone else's to help. After that my mother began to improve significantly. She still could not walk fully, but the very fact that she could get up and although, extremely clumsily, but still move independently, I was already very happy. With her eyesight also improved, although not as obvious as with walking. but as if light and shadow already distinguished. I was just happy that my mom was on the mend. But only my happiness did not last long. In 6 months began strange things. Mom periodically began to wander aimlessly around the house and behave in a way that she would not have behaved, breaking things and swearing at people with a mat. In a word, it was as if she had been replaced by another person, and such oddities manifested themselves only at night, after midnight and before dawn. During the day she behaved as usual. Moreover, she had no memory of what she had done at night. I had already decided that she had dementia, after all she was over 80. But the psychiatrist's examination did not reveal any abnormalities in her mental health. Moreover, the progress that had been made in restoring her motor functions also began to manifest itself only at night, and during the day she was paralyzed again. And at one point it all went too far. I came home late, it was past midnight, and saw my mother strangling our maid. The girl was barely alive. If I had come 5 minutes later and she would not have been saved. With difficulty I managed to drag my mother away from the unfortunate girl and lock her in the nearest room. I realized that I had to go to the witch doctor and demand that everything be fixed. But when I arrived at the house where she lived, I learned from the neighbors that the old woman had died a week ago after being hit by a car. By the way, the guy who recommended her died too, not of cancer, but of a heart attack, though he wasn't young, so maybe it's a coincidence.
Then Lawrence handed me an envelope and said,
"Here, this is compensation for the shock. Plus the money will be useful while you're looking for another job."
I silently accepted the envelope and walked towards the exit. Before leaving, Lawrence apologized again and wished me good luck. 2 months later I read the news: elderly businessman found dead in his apartment. The article described the highly unusual case that baffled all the forensic experts. The victim had a broken neck, and despite a very sophisticated and layered security system, there was no sign of forced entry. However, the forensic experts determined that the neck was definitely broken by human hands. The body of the deceased had only his own fingerprints and those of his elderly, paralyzed mother.